And we are live. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us in the latest of the Engage with E-commerce series with myself, Nathan Lomax, co-founder of Quickfire Digital, Heloise Finch, founder of Sell Beyond, and our special guest today, James Bright from Avalara. Hello, James. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Nathan. Thanks for having me. Good to be here. And hi, everybody. Hope you're well today and enjoying the sunshine.
James, we'll do some proper intros shortly. Just before we do, the reason Eloise and I thought that James would be the perfect guest is we're always getting asked questions around taxation, and lots of businesses are looking to internationalize and take their business overseas, etc. But there's always that sticking point around tax and what do we do, and we don't know what we don't know. And therefore, today, hopefully, we can debunk some of those myths. We can bring some light in terms of this is what you should know, this is what you should consider. And so we'll go through some questions. Standard housekeeping rules. If you've got any questions when you're listening today, chuck them in the comments. Eloise will do our best. Eloise and I will do our best to kind of work through them as quickly as we can so that everyone gets heard. So just starting with some intros. Myself, co-founder of Quickfire Digital. We started the agency 5 years ago. We specialize in Shopify and Shopify Plus, purely design and build. And we've worked with Eloise for some time now in terms of helping e-commerce brands to get online and then to scale. Eloise, over to you.
Hi, I'm Heloise, founder of Sell Beyond. We're an Amazon management consultancy. We help brands grow on Amazon through organizational behavior, technical knowledge of Amazon, and digital marketing on Amazon as well.
Fabulous. Thank you. And James, just a little insight in terms of your role at Avalara. Like, what are you up to day to day?
Sure. So my name's James Bright and I'm part of the partnerships team here at Avalara. I'm based in our Brighton office, and a day-to-day kind of breakdown for me would be just working with our partners, many of whom are in the agency space. They have clients who want to internationalize and questions arise around tax. So normally I'm the first point of contact for our partners to be able to ask questions about tax, and then I'll bring in the right expertise here at Avalara to help those conversations move forward. But beyond that, like attending all the industry events and getting out and working with partners and so on. But that's about it really.
You're somebody who does tax, but you also like people, James. We like you already.
I do. I love them. People and tax.
Very awesome. Good. Well, let's get started.
Then. Yeah, so we as Nathan said, we work with a lot of retail brands, a lot of e-commerce brands. From your perspective, James, what are the biggest tax challenges facing retail and e-com businesses right now?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question, and it's a broad question. There's a lot of answers, the different ways you could answer that, and different companies will have different challenges, of course, depending on where they're selling to, what they're selling, and how they're selling. So from experience, really, I'd break it down into, key challenges being understanding the legislation and how it's relevant to their business. So obviously, if you're selling to the US, for example, there will be legislation that you need to understand and have a good concept of in order to understand what you need to do in order to be compliant from a tax perspective. And then the day-to-day, the actual process of being compliant, I break it down into sort of three areas: one being registration, two being calculation of tax, and three, the actually filing of tax. That's the kind of the core compliance process for any company. But that's going to be a challenge if you don't know where to register, or if you don't have the right tech to calculate tax, or if you don't have the right processes in place to be able to file the tax. Once upon a time, companies would do things manually, and that was, like anything, manual tasks are kind of outdated and error prone. So, that would be the challenges, really.
What does registration mean, James? Starter for one. What does registration mean in terms of tax?
Yeah, so in order to collect tax, you need to be registered in the appropriate jurisdiction. So you can't collect tax without a registration. And first of all, you need to understand where you need to register. Now, there will be different drivers behind registration. It could be as simple as you're holding stock in a warehouse in a country. It means you have to register for VAT, and that means you then need to file in that country. Or it could be threshold related. So for example, to use the US again as an example, if you sell a certain amount of items and reach a certain threshold, economic threshold, then you would be deemed to need to register. So yeah, that's it really.
We have to
Sorry?
know what the triggers are to make us need to register, and that's going to depend on a lot of factors.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why I'd say registration can be a challenge if you don't know where to start, really. So again, I think that's the benefits of having a tax partner, really, or someone you can talk to about it, or good information that you can relate to your business, because everybody's selling different products and services to different parts of the world. Yeah, the requirements are not the same everywhere, as you can imagine. So yeah, like I say, registration, that's the kind of the first port of call. You need to know where you need to register, and you need to have it in place before you even start collecting tax.
James, I got
When
a
you say
question.
collect, sorry, just to be sure, Nathan, when you say collecting tax, we're paying tax, right?
Yeah, so you're collecting tax on behalf of the government and holding it in trust, and then you're paying it back to the government tax authority. So you're doing them a favour, essentially.
Got you. So I'm keen to ask, before pandemic, a lot of us were chatting and thinking, oh, okay, life's got to get better. Like, it can only get better. Enter COVID, enter World War III, etc., etc. We thought we had it bad now. Like, God, what are we becoming? But I'm interested to see with Brexit. I mean, that was massively on everyone's agenda. Obviously, all the events that are going on have taken over. But how can we get our e-commerce levels to back pre-Brexit, when actually we were trading freely and we were doing really well across all continents?
Yeah, good question. And I'd say since Brexit, there's been a good period of learning by companies and everybody involved. Certainly from our standpoint, we've heard a lot of problems from our customers who've stopped trading with the EU. And yeah, it was a really busy time for us in terms of arranging all of the helpful content to companies who are interested in trading in the EU or facing challenges, and that still to this day drives many of our conversations. Is companies who want to get back to trading into EU, and there's a few key things you can look at. Number one, I'd say, is understand what you need to do in terms of EU VAT compliance. Now, last year there was the EU VAT reforms which came into effect in July, and that was where the EU created VAT simplifications in order to make it easier for companies to be compliant with their VAT submissions. And schemes like the Import One-Stop Shop are designed to make that easier for e-commerce retailers. It means they can simplify their tax returns using just one submission rather than having to file in various countries across the EU. So understanding the EU VAT reforms would be, box number one to tick. And then the basics, really, understanding if you have the right EORI number in place. You need one for the UK, and it yeah, it does. But essentially, yeah, having those numbers in place. So the economic operators registration and identification number, you need one if you're a UK company, for example. You need one for the UK and you need one for the EU. And that was one of the really basic problems that we saw at the start of Brexit. A lot of companies didn't have those numbers in place. So goods were getting returned because they were getting stopped in customs because they didn't have the right EORI numbers. Companies have learned that, and they now know to come to the likes of Avalara to be able to get their EORI numbers so that they can trade freely into the EU. And then, beyond that, you're looking at ensuring that your goods have the correct HS codes assigned to them. So if you do choose to utilize some of the VAT simplifications such as iOS, what you need to have for your products is the correct HS code. So the correct, they can be recognized by customs, and also that the correct duties and taxes can be applied. Again,
why is that hard?
Well, a HS code in itself, yeah, I mean, you can look to do it manually, but it's going to take time and effort on your side. And the thing is, if you have an extensive list of products, then
you go and find it for every single one.
You need to look up a lot of codes, essentially. So if you're a clothing retailer and you've got 1,000 SKUs and you're shipping to, let's say, 10 different countries across the world, then that's a lot of different codes that you need. the HS codes are universal, the first 6 digits, but the remaining 4 digits or so are relevant to the country that you're shipping to. So again, that's a fundamental part of international cross-border trade, not just the EU, it's fair to say. So in terms of that as a process, I think, we've seen a lot of customers of ours who have new items added to their lines, seasonal additions. They've got their product catalog, they've got their items classified, but they have new items coming in every season and they need to get the codes correctly assigned. So again, that's an important part. And then also how you handle customs declarations. A lot of our customers utilize a lot of the useful software out there. ShipStation is a real popular option there for ensuring that your documentation is correct, so that they can be recognized by customs. And then also, finally, to add on that is understanding what Incoterms you need to be shipping on into the EU. Are you going to ship on a DDP basis, which is where you handle the taxes up front for the customer and present the taxes so that they know what the total landed cost is? Or are you going to revert to or stay on a DAP model, which is where you do not handle the taxes and let the customer pick those up, which is easier for the retailer, but it's not so good from a customer standpoint.
It's something that we see quite a lot on Amazon, where there's been a bit of confusion about who and where the taxes are being paid when you are exporting into Amazon EU. And I know that it's something I'm sure lots of our audience will, if they're selling on Amazon has a particular things that you need to get your head around. Otherwise, you can end up sending a parcel to someone and they're paying the duty and they're going to be really unhappy, or it'll get blocked anyway. So something really important if you're thinking to go back into the EU with it.
Definitely. How you handle customs duties is really important from getting your goods from A to B, but also your customer experience. People don't realize that in the first instance. Tax is a bit of a dry subject.
Never makes anyone's day, right?
No, it doesn't. But at the same time, it does play a part in the customer experience, which is what everyone's trying to do, is keep their customers happy. And e-commerce is obviously a very saturated market, and if you can keep your customers happy by giving them their selection of shipping options, as well as accurate tax and a full landed price, just for an example, then that's going to sort of end up as a positive buying experience. Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot to take in there. To answer your question about how do you get back to trading in the EU, it's covering the basics. And a lot of our resources, the Brexit checklist we have, that's a good place to start, or an evaluation call with us just to find out what you're planning to do, what you're selling, where you're holding stock.
What you don't know. All the
exactly.
Things you
Yeah, it's just having a chat with one of our VAT services team and putting you in the picture from that standpoint. Of course, you could go away and sorry, I was just going to say you could research all of this information on your own, but we're happy to talk to you directly and present some options.
I know from the perspective of lots of people we work with that are interested in going back into the EU, maybe a couple of years ago they were only registered in Germany or they were only registered in France, and now there's been a lot of changes in the EU VAT scheme. Really, have these reforms made it easier or harder?
Yeah, it's, again, a good question. If you're in a position to utilize the simplifications such as iOS, then I'd say yes, because it means what iOS is it's the import one-stop shop, and it's for companies who are located outside of the EU. And what it means is you can submit your EU VAT returns using just one form, rather than being registered in multiple countries in the EU and having to file in those countries respectively. So that is a streamlining of that process. It's worth mentioning as well at the moment that the EU are, as part of the VAT in the Digital Age initiative, they are looking at extending the threshold from 150 euros, which is currently the threshold for iOS. All items under 150 euros are able to be part of the iOS scheme. But if you're if you're kind of keeping up with the tax news at the moment, you might have seen that the EU are discussing lifting that threshold and making IOS mandatory for companies who are located outside the EU, which I think would be a great thing, because it would mean more companies can benefit from the simplifications that IOS bring, perhaps.
James, I've got a question around, we talk a lot about the past and we talk a lot about the future, but like as of today, right now, if a retailer comes to me and says, Nathan, we want to sell internationally, what legislation do UK companies need to be aware of as of right now?
Yeah, right now, so okay, good question. It depends where you're selling. As I mentioned, governments overseas will have legislation which is liable to change at any time, depending on what they want to do. Legislation is often a driver for them to be able to attract more revenue from distant sellers. So for example, if you're selling to the US, then you need to be aware of economic nexus. You might not have a physical presence in the US, but if you reach certain economic thresholds, it means you could be liable for sales tax, for example. Also, if you're trading internationally, we've seen a change in the legislation when it comes to HS codes. So the World Customs Authority, they have updated the latest edition of HS codes. And what that means is retailers should really review the codes that they have on file, but also look to adhere to the new edition. So there would be two areas that I would say are important to pay attention to. But also, yeah, we spoke briefly about the EU VAT schemes. Understand what the reforms mean to your business and how they can help you open up trade in the EU again. So
James,
there would be
sorry,
kind of three
one
key
other
points.
thing. One
Yeah.
other thing was just around US. You mentioned the US there. Does it vary state to state in terms of what they can do and can't do in terms of taxation? Because that's another concern for some of our clients is, look, we want to get to the US, but actually, if I'm selling here or there, that my taxation liabilities might be totally different.
Yeah, it's a good question. And if you're selling to the US, 45 of the states there all have a sales tax regime, and it will vary from state to state. So it's fair to say you can treat them as all like their own individual entities. They have their own rates and rules and approach to things beyond tax, but from a sales tax perspective, yeah, they do differ greatly. They'll have different thresholds and they'll have different stances on what triggers physical nexus. Some states, for example, if you attend a trade show there, that state could view that as you taking steps to build in a market in their state. Or if you're working with an agency there, there's different rules around it. So yeah, it's
terrifying. So you really need someone to give you a bit of advice on that.
Ideally, yes. I mean, a lot of retailers start trading in the US and then find out that they've triggered economic nexus because they've had a spike in sales. They've reached the kind of the 200 order limit in a particular state, and then a few months later they realize they're on the hook for sales tax. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack, but I'd say to any company that's thinking of the US, understand what nexus is and understand if you change how you set up your business in the US, I should say, your operation, that's going to have an implication from a sales tax standpoint. So if you choose to utilize warehouses in multiple states, then you're going to have sales tax obligations in multiple states, as opposed to just having stock in one state. That means you potentially only have physical nexus in that one state. But yeah, whenever you change something in the US, you just think about sales tax. What are the implications? If you're selling more, it means you're probably going to reach a threshold at some point and you're going to need to register.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that explanation. I know Avalara has done quite a lot of work around options for tackling customs duties. This was massive for a lot of people after Brexit last year, and I'm sure in many different locations it is. Can you talk to us about this and how decisions around customs duties affect both businesses and their customers?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of our conversations start with customers looking to improve the cross-border experience for their end customer. So how a company handles customs duties, I mentioned it earlier, it does affect a couple of things really, the delivery time, but also the customer experience directly. a lot of retailers are looking to move away from a DAP model and move to a DDP model. And what that means is they're looking to present the total landed cost at checkout to their customers. So they're going to need technology to be able to calculate the customs duties, and they're also going to need their goods to have the correct HS code so that calculation can be done. And essentially, retailers who are able to do that means their customers are going to be able to go onto the website, make a purchase, see that the product is, say, worth €100, and the duties will be displayed underneath. The customer then sees that the item is going to be €100 plus €20 of worth of duties and tax. It means they can make an informed buying decision. They know what the total landed cost is for that item. So that's what a lot of retailers are looking to move towards. Obviously, it requires an investment in technology to be able to do that. But if you're serious about trading internationally and serious about customer experience, then it's a good thing to be looking at.
So
James,
this would be relevant.
Go on, Heloise.
I was going to say this would be relevant for people who've got e-com websites where they're offering to ship things out to people, for example, in the EU, and you can get software that will automatically calculate.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. So calculating customs duties, there's a number of factors that go into that behind the scenes, what's being sold, the value, the HS code is a very important part of that, as I mentioned. But yeah, it's essentially having the software that presents that at the checkout page. That's where the transaction's taking place. That's where the calculation needs to be executed, but also presented to the customer. I always go back to a very simple analogy. If you walk into a shop and buy a coffee mug for £5 and take it to the till, and the cashier says that'll be £6, please, you're going to be upset, and you're going to ask why. And they say, well, there's an additional tax on that. But that's what you should be doing in your e-commerce store. Is not saying, oh, it's going to be £5, and then when the goods arrive at the customer's house in Germany or wherever, it's going to be £10. It's being transparent with the pricing and letting the customer know what they're in for, so that they can say, yes, I can afford that, or no, I can't. I'm not going to buy that.
James, I've obviously sent a couple of clients to you recently with a US focus, and I'm keen to pick up on that a bit more. Like, a lot of other inquiries we're getting at the moment are, the US seems like a massive opportunity. How do you set up to sell in the US? What are the risks versus the opportunities for those that are listening and like, you know what, we're ready to pull the trigger and try and enter the US market?
Yeah, sure. Good question. And I'll start with the opportunity. Obviously, we all know that if you crack the US, your business is going to be doing well. And to start in the US, I've seen a lot of success stories of companies that come to us for guidance on US sales tax compliance, and it's been good to see their business grow over there. And they're the ones who have a kind of a unique proposition over there. They might have a niche product, or they might be a unique brand that the US market can't get in the US. So yeah, there's opportunities to capitalize on there, because obviously the size of the population. But in terms of the risks, well, from experience, having been involved in many conversations with retailers selling into the US, the risks are going into it head first and not understanding the sales tax obligations that your business can have. And like I say, I always go back to having a fundamental understanding of Nexus in the first instance. So for those of you unsure, Nexus really is just a way of describing the connection between your company and a particular state taxing authority. So you can have physical Nexus. So if you have items in a warehouse in the state of Georgia, for example, that would mean you have physical Nexus and you need to register and file tax in that state. And then you have economic nexus. As I mentioned earlier, if you reach the economic thresholds for that particular state, it could be $100,000 or 200 orders in a calendar year, then you could be on the hook for sales tax by triggering economic nexus. And that's just the rule of thumb. Some states do have different thresholds, so don't think that that's the threshold for every single state, but that's pretty common.
So
but the risks, Sorry, I was just going to get to the good bit. The risks are to to carry on selling and not have your registrations in place, and then see an amazing selling period across Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and then realize a few months down the track that you should have been collecting sales tax all this time, and then have to devote time and resources to rectifying your historical liabilities. It's stressful, takes time, costs money. So I'd say to anyone, it's just always best to talk to the likes of us and have a conversation about your strategy for the US in terms of where you're planning to sell. So for example, if you're selling items that are going to be used by a certain demographic, then certain states will be more in focus for you. So factor that in from your sales tax strategy. Think, well, I'm gonna go through that threshold soon enough. You should just get registered and make sure that you've got the right software in place so that you've got a scalable solution. So when you start to sell more across the US, you can essentially meet your compliance needs because you've already got the software set up.
One of the things that we see is companies, if you're selling on Amazon.com, Amazon will automatically deduct the sales tax. So it looks really easy because they will deduct it before it goes into your account. But of course, people are selling on Amazon.com in the States have often got warehousing obligated, they're warehousing in the States, and they might also be launching an e-com or a social sell as well. Mm-hmm. How do you find out that maybe I've set up, gone in a hurry, pulled the trigger like Nathan said, and there might be some terrible surprise lurking for me. How do you get informed? Does somebody sending an email? Is there like a guy in dark glasses that comes at the door with a bill? How does that work out?
Yeah, a Nexus questionnaire is if you get a tax notice from a tax office, a Nexus questionnaire, quite often, we've seen instances of companies being really unlucky. Perhaps an auditor themselves has made a purchase on a particular website and realized that sales tax has not been calculated at checkout, and that's launched an investigation. But that you'd be really unlucky in that scenario. But what we've seen is the states are increasing their spend on their audit teams so that they can go after more distant sellers, because sales tax is such an important part of state revenue budgets. Up to 47% of all revenue comes into the US states comes from sales tax. So you can understand the interest in them making sure that all distant sellers are effectively paying into the coffers.
So you will end up having an email or some kind of letter. They will find you and find your address, and you might get something come in.
Businesses are under more scrutiny now than ever, really, because the technology in place that audit teams use is more sophisticated. The world's now a smaller place due to all the technology, and it's a lot easier for them to find sellers who are non-compliant and than it would have been a few years ago. So ultimately, I if I was running a business, I wouldn't want that sort of looming in the background. And
there's
quite
enough
often
surprises as it is in business, right, James? We don't want that one.
Exactly, yeah. So I wouldn't want that. So bear in mind. So sometimes it takes longer than you potentially would expect, but at that point, if you're not compliant, the penalties will carry interest as well, and they take a lot of time and resource to rectify.
I've got a question around Indonesia as a market. I was doing some reading this week, and I saw it reported that perhaps that Indonesia has some kind of untapped e-commerce potential. Where do companies go to get the information they need before they explore a new region, whether it be the Middle East or Asia or the EU or the US, etc.? Is there a hub that says this is the size of the opportunity, this is the pitfalls, this is the opportunity, etc.?
Yeah, good question. And I'd from experience in my day-to-day conversations with partners, I would always recommend that anybody going into a new region, from a tax standpoint, talk to us, learn more about what tax regimes in play in the particular region, what software you're going to need to be able to calculate the tax, and also, maybe talk to the Department of International Trade. I mean, they're experts in international trade, obviously, and can provide a lot of advice as to how to go about setting up in a new region like Indonesia. But from a tax standpoint, yeah, we've got a website, VAT Live, and on there's a hub basically for every country in the world, and you can go on there, find out the basics about the tax regime there. You know, how is it relevant to e-commerce sellers, and of course get in touch with us to have a conversation about it. So that's where I'd tell people to start.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, I'll put that link up so people can find it afterwards. We've covered a lot of different ground there, James, and it's certainly provided some food for thought, I'm sure, for people listening in. How do you view the future of retail and e-commerce in the UK?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I myself would only see it growing. Like, there's lots of companies now who are expanding into e-commerce that you wouldn't have expected before, and also those companies are now looking to make sales internationally. They're aware of all the technology that makes cross-border selling a lot more achievable than it was a few years ago. I mean, if you look at the logistics industry, I always just find it amazing that you can get your products to customers overnight to some weird and wonderful destinations, all for quite a reasonable cost. So I can only see it growing. And obviously from there, you know, if you're selling internationally, you're going to have new tax obligations, and you know, that's where we help, of course. But with that said, you know, I would always see legislation evolving to basically make sure that distant sellers are tax compliant. Like I say, you see the EU VAT reforms, they've been designed in mind to simplify tax compliance for e-commerce retailers and make compliance more achievable, because that's in the government's best interest. They want as many people paying tax.
E-commerce, right? So that's the good thing. Governments want to encourage it, but there might be a bit of catch up on the compliance side.
Yeah, it's fair to say, and eventually we'll get there where all governments are you know, have got their legislation in place and everyone understands it. But I think we're a long way away from that point at this time. So in the meantime,
James.
Yeah, it's blue sky thinking, isn't it? But essentially, in the meantime, you know, a lot of our day-to-day conversations are just to try and simplify that. So I'd say, you know, anybody who wants to know a little bit more about their tax obligations or the various VAT schemes, get in touch with us. You know, we're only too happy to kind of have an evaluation call with you, and then present some ideas, and then from there, hopefully, you'll know more.
James, thank you. A massive thank you on behalf of Heloise and I for joining us today, James. I know both of us are always crying out for support when it comes to internationalization and tax, and what to do and what to say and not to say, etc. So a massively valuable session. Thank you. We'll make sure this is recorded and shared with all those that weren't able to attend. For those that have attended today, I hope you've enjoyed today's session. Thank you for joining the latest in the episode of Engage with E-commerce. Heloise and I will be running another one of these over the next couple of months, so please do stay tuned. But for now, James, a massive thank you. Heloise, as always, thank you for being a fabulous co-host, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.